Welcome to Chattel Fixtures PEI Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, David Cyrus MacDonald. Bernard MacKinnon of Assurance Inspections has been working in construction since 1998, bringing this experience to his role as a home inspector. For 8 of those years in construction, he worked as crew foreman. His vast experience working on foundations, renovations, and new builds serves Bernard's home inspection clients well, as he's able to identify structural issues that may otherwise be missed. Though Assurance Inspections is based in Kings County, Bernard serves the entire island. I heard about Bernard from Kendra Stretch. I bumped into her in the gym, and she suggested I have him on the show, and here we are. We will be talking about the unique challenges of home buying and selling on PEI. Welcome, Bernard MacKinnon.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so jumping right into it, what are some common issues with homes on PEI?
Yeah, I mean, weather is always a big factor here, right? So like anytime if you have wood exposed on the exterior building, it's always susceptible to rot and deterioration.
Mm-hmm.
Maintenance is a big issue with a lot of things. And especially if you live close to the water, your maintenance is going to be more just because the climate is harder on it, just because you're getting that spray from the water and all of those things.
Yeah.
So I find exteriors things is a pretty common issue here, just because of the nature of it.
Right. Yeah. So like this would be the siding, the outside of the foundation too? Or
Not
like
so much
roof,
the outside of the foundation.
Windows.
Roof, windows, siding,
Yeah.
decks, any of those things.
Decks. How long does a deck last?
I tell people if you get 20 years out of your deck, you're doing really well.
Yeah, because I see a lot that last longer than that, and yeah, it is. They're such. It's they're so like I have a huge deck on this place, and it is what I do now is every once in a while I'll go around and find the rotten boards and just replace those ones. But at a certain point, it's like going to be like replacing the whole deck.
Exactly right. Yeah. So it's just like anything, right? If when this deck was new, if somebody would have put some preservative on it, then that would have certainly helped things like a stain or something like that. Anytime you can keep that moisture from actually penetrating into the wood, it's always a better option.
Absolutely. And how often would you suggest people do that to something like a deck?
Depending on what it is, what the product that they're using, but you could probably, it might be as often as every year, and you might get every couple of years out of it,
right?
Before you have to do it. I've seen some that had a serious coat of finish on them, but they are, for the most part, when they're like that, usually in really, really good shape.
Right, and if you just keep doing that, then the deck will last pretty much indefinitely.
It'll last a lot longer. I mean, nothing's indefinite, right? Because it is wood, indeed.
Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, there's different products now. Like you can get like composite decking and things like that, which will certainly. I mean, composite decking lasts forever. There's no.
Yeah.
It doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't rot. It doesn't any of those things.
Yeah, and so what's the cost comparison on something like that?
Last time I did a cost comparison on it, it was a few years ago. It was about 3 times the cost of conventional decking.
Oh, right. Okay, so that's a big decision.
That is a big decision. And of course, you have to think about, if you were going to go with something like composite decking, you'd have to think about the structure is still wood. So there's things. So
if you're still replacing the beams and stuff underneath it.
Yeah, but there's things that you can do to keep those beams and things in better shape.
Yeah.
If you were using composite decking.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. For example, there's like a membrane that you can put over top of the joist, so that the water doesn't penetrate into it, and it's kind of a self-healing membrane. So as you're fastening the decking pieces down, it's a self-healing membrane. So then it doesn't allow water to. Moisture and stuff, dirt sitting on, in between your pieces of decking, things like that.
Everything you wanted to know about decks on Chattel Fixtures PEI Real Estate Podcast. This is great. I was not planning on asking you about decks. What should people be looking for when they're choosing a home inspector? Yeah,
I mean, the biggest thing for me is to ask people about experience.
Yeah.
Like, what is your past experience? And past experience can be very... it can be very, I don't even know what the right word is.
Varied.
Right. Exactly. So like some people's experience, like a good construction background is always a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
I myself have been a licensed carpenter since 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel like, and the licensing in part, I find in PEI, for example, when I became a licensed carpenter, in order to do that, I had to have 2,000 hours of construction experience before I could even write my test for my license.
Right. How do they measure that?
So what you do is when you go through apprenticeship, they give you a logbook, and your employer has to sign off on your logbook every year.
Okay, so you have to be you can't like retroactively be like, oh, I was working.
I think they could go back a year or two, but not too much.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's good to know. I know
and you have to do a few
laborers in construction. So.
Yeah, and when I did it, it was a few years ago. I think I became licensed in 2009.
Yeah.
So back then we had 13 tests to write, and you had to pass each one of those tests and have your 2,000 hours in order to write for your red seal.
Okay.
But I think now it's different. They have different blocks that they have to write. It's not quite the same. Like for me, when I was doing mine, if you had your 2,000 hours and you were doing your block release, which was, you took 8 weeks and you went to Holland College and you sat in a classroom and they did those things, I could write all 13 of those tests in those 8 weeks if I wanted to with my 2,000 hours.
Right.
It would be a pretty...
A lot of studying.
A lot of studying, a lot of tests for 2 weeks. But I think now it has to be spaced out a little bit more.
Oh, okay. So it's going to take some time.
It's going to take some time. And you still need the hours.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. Are there any red flags that people should be looking for, like to avoid a certain home inspector?
Not necessarily. I mean, the biggest thing is I'm more of an advocate of like hands-on experience.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm not so much of an advocate for, I know there's a few online training courses and things like that people can take to be home inspectors. And I have nothing really against online training classes, but I just think for something like this, you need that practical background. I really feel it has to be there.
Yeah. How common is it, do you think, for people who are doing home inspections to only kind of know what they're doing, because like presumably with these courses, they're like, okay, this is like a checklist of things you have to check. Maybe this is the sort of things you focus on. This is how you write a report. Is that what it is?
Not really. Like for myself, I just took a few courses just so I could become certified.
Yeah.
And I know when we were doing that, they didn't really emphasize on that a lot. They didn't really emphasize on how you should write your home inspection reports or anything like that, to be honest.
Because there's quite a variety of how people approach that, right?
Exactly, right. So for me, I feel a lot of people are getting their information from the software that they use to compose the home inspection report.
Oh, okay. So is there like standard-ish software for home inspectors?
I don't know if it's standard per se, but I know there's a few different options. Yeah. So I know for myself, I use Horizon software, and I find it great. They're very supportive. It's very user friendly.
Okay.
I have a Mac, so it was one of the only ones that was compatible with a Mac.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway, and I really like it now. Mm-hmm. I find it great. It's quite easy to navigate after. I've been doing this for 8 years, so I've spent some time. I spent some time with
Horizon that whole time.
That whole time.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So home inspection reports often have a lot of detail about smaller issues. What should they be really focusing their attention on?
Yeah. So I always try to get the real estate agent and the client to meet me at the end of the inspection, if at all possible. Even if we can't do that, sometimes we've done like a FaceTime call or what have you.
Yeah.
And then we just I normally go over the highlight reel of the things that I found during the home inspection. And then I tell them when they get the home inspection report, try not to panic. Just read through it carefully. Any questions you might have, please let me know, because there's a lot of information. Some of it is important information, and some is just plain and simple information.
Yeah, exactly. Can you think of any examples of stuff that like is just information, but that doesn't matter that much?
Like I find sometimes silly little things, like there might be a little piece of siding that's maybe not quite in place, or trivial little things like that. Like you're almost always going to see a GFCI outside, like a ground fault circuit interrupter plug outside that doesn't reset, or it doesn't work properly.
That's probably one of these, again, like salty, wet air
issues. Yep. Yeah. They're just corroding, and that's typically what happens with them. So it's just things, those are kind of pretty trivial little things.
Yeah.
Those are about it. Almost anything that you see, you always wonder like what else is there, or there's always a little bit of unknown, but
yeah, because I think probably for the average person viewing who hasn't done a lot of buying and selling, just to clarify, maybe you can explain the level that you can, like what you can do as a home inspector and what you can't, because, for example, you can't be cutting into walls and seeing what's behind, right? Can you kind of define where those boundaries are?
Yeah. So for me personally, and with the association that I'm a member of, so they give us kind of guidelines and things. So technically, I'm not allowed to move anything. I'm not allowed to move boxes or furniture or anything like that. Exactly, right? Because if there's something in that box that gets broken, right, then I'm liable for that. Same thing with furniture. If I was to move it and scratch the floor or something like that, then of course I'm liable again.
Okay, so you're just peeking around these
You're
things,
just kind of peeking around these things
too much.
With, mind you, common sense has to play a part in all of this. Mm-hmm. So if there was something like that I felt it would be better if it was moved, I would typically wait until there was somebody else there. Like when I'm there doing the home inspection, there's quite often nobody else there. Right. I'm in somebody else's house and there's nobody there. Mm-hmm. A lot of times then I'll wait until the realtor gets there or the client gets there. Mm-hmm. And then I'll just tell them, like, listen, you watch me as I'm doing this. I'm not breaking anything. I'm not dropping anything. You're not hearing any, noises or anything like that. I just want to look behind here to see what might be here.
I guess that makes sense too. If you're a homeowner, you don't want to feel like everything was rifled through.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you ever get people obstructing things on purpose, do you think?
There's a couple of times that I've wondered why they've done something that way. But as a most part, I think most people are pretty good about it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. In your opinion, is it ever appropriate for a buyer to put in an offer without a condition of inspection?
It all depends on what your comfort level is, right? Yeah. Blanket answer, no. Just because there's so many things that could be there.
Yeah.
That's really the blanket answer for it. It's, again, what you're comfortable with.
But in those really competitive situations, it's a tough situation, if you feel like that's what's going to get you the house or not. Have people ever, if someone was to do that, or if they did it and regretted it, like what would you recommend they do even after the fact? Or
I don't think there's a lot that can really be done after the fact. I mean, it's just kind of a grin and bear it, right? Like I have a few realtors now, or maybe not so much now, but when the market was super aggressive, that would call me and book me or find out my schedule and tentatively book me for an inspection before they put an offer in.
So they could have a schedule.
Right. So then when they put their offer in, they might give like 2 days for the home inspection clause because they know they've already they know they've already got me booked. They know as soon as they put their offer in, and then they would just call me and say, yes, our offer was accepted, or no, it wasn't.
Right. Yeah. And so how often would that happen for you where people are booking it?
There was a few realtors that did it on a pretty regular basis, but not everybody was doing that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, that's a great strategy.
I thought it was a good strategy.
Yeah. It's one of those levels of organization that not every realtor would kind of
they're
be
thinking
up
a
for.
couple of steps ahead.
Yeah, that's cool. That's a great tip though. For new homes, should people always inspect new homes?
I mean, again, blanket policy, yes. I think the only way that you could maybe get away from doing the home inspection is if you could go there and bring like a family member or a close family friend. If you could get like an electrician and a plumber and a few of those things to come in and just kind of go through it. That may be a way that you could get away from it. I still see things on new houses. I typically don't see a lot, but I have seen some new houses that were a lot.
Yeah, I had a friend recently who I was talking to, and he, a neighbor in a house I was doing an open house in actually, and he was telling me about the vent above the stove.
Right.
I'm blanking on what that's called. What do you call that?
The range hood.
Range hood. Thank you very much. It was just dumping right. He was looking for the manual for the stove, and he reached up in the cupboard above, and he's like, it's kind of damp and oily up here, and it was just venting right into the cupboard above. Like, how often do you see things like that?
You'd be quite surprised. Quite often. I mean, and that's one of the things you see on new houses is you'll see like an exhaust fan maybe not hooked up or not ducted outside quite right, where they just It's hard to say exactly what happened, right? A lot of times you try to give people the benefit of the doubt and think like they just didn't connect it or what have you, right? But there's quite a few times where there's stuff like that.
Yeah. Any other stories about that?
Not particularly with things like that, no.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of like over-the-range microwaves that have the just the little vent that just basically recirculates the air?
Yeah, I mean it's whatever. Cooking habits is a big thing, right? So I mean, if you have cooking things that are really smelly or you're a lot of condensation and things like that, and it all depends on the layout of your house and air exchanger, and there's a lot of factors involved there with it. Always the best policy would be to vent it outside, no question.
Are you always, when you're doing these your inspections, are you checking all the mechanical components? So say if there is a range hood that has kind of like buttons on it for functioning, would you be like trying it out, turning it on, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so and typically what I do when I'm doing the inspection for things like that, like range hoods and clothes dryers in particular, exhaust fans, is I want to turn them on because I want to see that they are indeed actually vented outside. So I turn them on, walk outside, see where the vent is, make sure there is actually air coming out of that vent, just to make sure there's some continuity with it.
Right, and sometimes you could probably check in the attic afterwards too.
If I don't see it inside, then that's where you start looking. And that's why in the process where I do the home inspection, the attic is the very last place that I go.
Okay, yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah, maybe to walk through your process when you get to the property, like what is your process in doing the home inspection? Where do you go first? Where do you finish up? All that kind of thing.
Yeah, so typically what I'm doing is I would normally, depending on the property, I might take, like I have a tool bag and stuff that I would normally take inside the house and just leave it inside the house. And I might have a quick look around just to see what's in there. And then I normally start on the exterior of the house, walk all around. I'm looking underneath decks, windows, doors, siding, downspouts, gutters, grading, the whole shoot and match, try to get a good feel for all of those things. And then I would normally look at the roof. I would come inside and do the basement where you'd look at your electrical panel and your furnace and all of those things. And then I would go to the top floor and work my way back down. And the attic is normally the last place I go.
Yeah. And then, so as you're doing this, when you're at different parts of the house, you're getting clues about what's happening in other parts and kind of piecing that together.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you ever able to kind of get much insight on things that you can't see just based on kind of power of deduction?
Sometimes you get a feeling somewheres that there's something else here that you're missing just based on, some contributing factors. It's really hard to explain sometimes, but you do. It's almost like your instincts kick in and you're like, there's something here that's just not right. So sometimes you keep digging until you find it. Like you look a little harder, or you're maybe pay a little extra attention to something.
Yeah.
Or look at something and then go turn something on to see what happens with that.
Right.
Just to see.
And probably clues, like if some aspect of the construction is kind of like, say no egress window in a bedroom or something like that, you'd be kind of like, oh, there's a red flag.
Egress windows is a pretty common thing.
Is it?
Yeah, especially in the age of the house.
Oh, okay. Even for like above grade, because basements, yes. When people throw in a bedroom in the basement, I think that's extremely common.
Yep.
But above grade,
it's still based on the age of the house.
Oh, okay. And when did that start to become a thing? Like, was there?
I would guess mid-90s, probably.
Oh, really?
Late 90s.
It wasn't until then that people started really caring about that?
It's really tough to say exactly when the exact date was, but anything like houses that are in the 70s, early 80s is very common for them to have egress or windows that are not egress.
Yeah, and for those listening who don't know what egress windows are, I'm guessing most people do. I don't know why, but it's just basically you need to be able to climb out of it, right? So they have certain standard size.
So an egress window just means that in the event of an emergency, it means that first responders are able to get in and people inside are able to get out.
Yeah.
And in order for a window to be egress, it has to be a minimum of 3.8 square feet. Can't be any less than 15 inches in any one direction.
Oh, okay.
And it's the opening part of the window. It's not just like if you look at the window and see, like a casement that might have a fixed pane on one side and an open pane on the other. You don't measure the entire opening of the window. You measure the portion of the window that opens that you could actually climb out of.
Right. So there's probably a lot of stuff that just isn't quite that 15 inches in height, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So it's like the ones that like
Single hung windows. Yeah.
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 You pull it up and then it's like, you
13
know, a
and a
home that
half
was well
or-
built in the 1980s that is just kind of like, oh yeah, this is technically, it couldn't get out of here.
Exactly.
Or you might be able to get out of here, but it doesn't meet the criteria.
It doesn't meet the
So that would make its way into the inspection report, and then it would kind of be up to the purchaser whether or not that's something they felt they were obligated to deal with, right?
Right. And so that would be one of those points where I would talk to the client, and the real estate agent would typically be there. And depending on the experience of the real estate agent, they may have dealt with this a number of times, right? But I would tell them, typically based on the age of this house, it's a pretty common thing to see egress windows.
Yeah.
Or windows that are not egress other.
And maybe this is not a question that you'd be able to answer, but you're probably not going to see someone, say, from zoning department coming and saying, hey, these windows aren't egress, you know?
Right.
You have to
Typically. I mean, so I do the math on every one, like I do the square footage on them.
Right.
Just to be sure.
Right. Yeah. And then that way they know. And then you, as the new owner, you're taking on that risk, and then you can make an informed decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, yeah. You also, I can imagine you informing that in your decision too. If you had someone who was like, you know, there was greater risk of something bad happening, maybe they're not the one in that bedroom, but I guess we're getting into sort of random.
Yeah. A whole other realm of things. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on sandstone foundations? I mean, they'd be like pretty common in, say, the 500 district downtown, or in a lot of like older buildings. I feel like a lot of like municipal buildings and old like ones with sandstone foundations. But what are your thoughts on sandstone foundations?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a couple that were beautiful foundations. Like they were very true and nice and square, great walls, no big bowing or bulging, no big gaps or anything in between them.
Right.
So I've seen a few that were really, really well done, and I've seen a few that have been definitely neglected.
Yeah.
So like the biggest thing with something like that, because the foundation in that point would be a little vulnerable.
Yeah.
Gutters and grading are a huge aspect for something like that, because in between the sandstone, it's typically just dirt, right? It's not, sometimes there is some mortar in between there, but typically not very much. So if people could, you know, if you can keep any water or anything away from your house, which is always a good idea anyway, but it's even more important for something like that.
How often is it, okay, maybe this is not a question for you, but I feel like you'd at least have some idea of it. How common is it for the water issue in a basement to not have to do with grading and gutters and that kind of thing, but almost like an underground stream? Or being
so
in a
I think
low-lying area?
I certainly think there is some of those. I've come across a couple that you have to wonder, like, is this what's happening here? Because gutters and grading seem to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
just that the water table maybe is up there, and
the water table may be up there. I mean, the thing you got to think about when you're talking about a foundation is it is realistically most times a hole in the ground.
Yeah.
Right. And there is water in the ground. So, you know, it's one of those things, right? It's always a concern. You want to keep as much water as possible. That's why when digging the foundation, that would be something that you would normally see, maybe some evidence of that, of some issues.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there's all these questions about how you would actually deal with that. Say if you were building there and there was like, oh, there's like water coming through here. Could you like just like do some work on drainage around it? Like,
so for me personally, if I was digging a hole, getting ready to put in a foundation, and I came across maybe the water table that was up higher than what I expected, I would probably be starting to look at bringing in some loads of fill and changing the grade on my lot so I wouldn't have to go as deep with my foundation.
Raise it up, the whole building.
Exactly.
Right. So that'd be more work, but then you end up with a better place.
Well, I mean, what's the point if you're going to be dealing with an issue?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
In perpetuity.
For years and years and years.
Yeah. Rather than get it done right once.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Put the time and effort into it. That's the time to do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, without question.
Yeah. Right. But that's also like, this is one of those cases where having an experienced builder who has integrity and is willing to make those tough decisions that, oh yeah, this is going to cost a little bit more. And I guess people structure their billing on new builds in so many different ways too, whether it's a fixed price contract, whether it's a spec build, whether it's someone who's kind of pay as you go. And so in which case, in a lot of different cases, there'd be some tough conversations happening about
absolutely.
These things
and
too.
I'm sure anytime you're doing something like that, right, it's a big transaction. You're not typically talking about $1,000. You're talking about a couple of $100,000 or even more, right? So it's always one of those things. There may have to be some tough conversations to be had, but typically with something like that, you would be maybe anticipating some of that anyway. You always have to look at the big picture, right? Are you in a valley section? Are you on the side of a hill? Are you at the top of a hill? I mean, if you're at the top of a hill, you really wouldn't be expecting anything like that.
Yeah, exactly. In which case, it probably has more to do with drainage properly, like it being a local issue as opposed to it being something where the whole neighborhood is going down
exactly
into your lot.
Yeah.
Cool. Do you see similar issues with higher end homes as you see with smaller?
I think they're about the same. I mean, the only thing is with higher end homes is normally the building materials are a little bit better. Yeah. A little higher quality. You don't see a ton different. Yeah. Most higher end homes, again, just better materials used for building. They're not, it's, when you have more money to work with, usually you can have better things. That's just the reality of it.
Which hopefully it's kind of like this microphone stand here. It's kind of like it's really cheap, and this microphone keeps wanting to fall, and it's like, well, it's not surprising given the price,
right?
That you're gonna have issues like that. What about pools? If a place has a pool, are you inspecting that?
Not really, just because I don't really know what I should be looking for in a pool. I'm certainly looking at if there's a deck around the pool, I'm certainly looking at that.
Right.
If there is a pool building, like a pool house or things like that, then I'm certainly looking at that. But as far as the function of the pool, if they're sometimes with the stone and things like that around the pool, if they're disrupted or moving or things like that, then absolutely, of course, we're looking at that. If I did see a leak in the pool, I'm certainly going to mention it. I have come across that a few times before, where you see, an above ground pool, and you see there's it's leaking out the side or something. Yeah. But as for the pool function itself, I'm not typically doing much of it.
Doing a mechanical inspection of that.
I'm not testing your pH levels in your water or any of those things, right? I'm just
but not the pump or the filter or anything like that. No, that's kind of that's a different
different aspect altogether.
Yeah, I suppose you could bring in somebody from the pool company if you.
I've brought in some different times that specialize in some things just to help out with something. But normally those specialty things, right, are there for a reason. You get people that are in that's what they specialize in. And
I have purchased a place with a pool before, and I was really nervous until it actually worked. And then it did, and it was fine.
Absolutely.
But, okay, so what got you into being a home inspector? Maybe you can tell me the story. I mean, obviously you're in construction. Yep. There's a lot of opportunity in construction to, if you want to earn a good living, the potential is there. Why home inspection? Yeah.
So for me personally, the reason why I got into doing home inspections was I was working in a construction crew, and one of the guys on the construction crew, him and some of his buddies were buying some income properties.
Yeah.
So they started asking me to go with them just to kind of help them out in looking at some of these properties. So I would go with them when they do a viewing sometimes and just kind of give them a rough idea of what they should be looking for. And one of the times I happened to be there that I could meet these guys at this place was the same time that the home inspector was there.
Okay, yeah.
So it actually worked out well. And I can remember I was the first person there at this thing, and I was talking to the home inspector, and I was like, how's everything going? And I kind of explained to him my role in this whole situation just so that everybody's on the same page and we're all good. Anyway, and this home inspector explained to me that he said, there's something really weird happening with this house. He said, it has 2 foundations. And I said, that is very odd, but I said, whatever. I said, we can, I was talking to him, out in the driveway, and I was like, we'll wait until we get inside and we'll have a look. This was actually it was just a 4-foot foundation on this building. So anyway, we went inside and went into the basement of it. He explained to me, he said, it's got a concrete foundation on the inside and a wood foundation on the outside. And I said, like, that's even more bizarre. Like, I've actually worked on some crews where if you have a foundation wall that maybe has some cracks or that's leaking a little bit, I've done some work where we've built a wooden wall inside of that, and we've lined that in between the concrete and the wood wall with gravel, so it allows any moisture or anything to come through. We've installed a couple of things like pilasters, so it's like an angled support that holds everything in place. We've done that on the inside of some concrete walls. But I've never heard tell of having a wood wall on the outside of a concrete wall. So anyway, when I went down to the basement of this place, I pulled a piece of insulation out of the rim joist area, and the wood wall that was on the outside was actually, the sill was embedded in the concrete.
Oh, okay.
So the sill, for people that don't understand how that is, the sill is what's is the transition really between your floor system and your concrete.
And you'd use foundation. More like pressure treated wood there.
Exactly.
To keep the moisture from going from the foundation to the wood that's in the frame.
Yeah. So if you were doing a foundation, you would normally put maybe some anchor bolts sticking up through it.
Yeah.
And then you would bolt your sill down to it. But in this particular case, they had the sill was embedded in the concrete. So it was flush with the top of the concrete.
Oh,
that's why it almost seemed
like there was a wood
wall. But I mean, if you knew the process of how everything was built, it was very easy to see. Anyway, and in that same situation that I was in, there was open web floor joists in this place, which are structurally engineered floor joists. It's what you would see in a new building now, typically.
Okay.
And in this particular place, they cut the floor joists so that you could have access to the basement.
Okay.
And so when we were down there at this place, I remember with these guys, and they're asking me, they're like, "Oh, what do you think?" And I was like, "Well," I said, "they cut the floor joists here, which is not a great idea."
Yeah.
And the home inspector was like, "Oh," he said, "that's fine. They've resupported it." And I can remember I reached up because there was a piece that they had resupporting it, and I could shake it, and I'm like, "This is not supported. This is not like having that floor joist cut isn't the end of the world, but it's certainly something that should have been brought to everybody's attention."
Yeah.
I feel personally.
Not just kind of like, it's fine.
It's fine. Yeah, we're good. It's not really that fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, and I can remember when we were doing that in that particular point, and Kendra Stretch was actually those.
Oh, nice.
Their realtor. So when we were outside afterwards, the home inspector had left, and we were just standing there talking, and we talked about, the things that we had come up with. And Kendra had mentioned, she's like, "Well, maybe this is what you should be doing." So, a little while later, with a little more research, this is actually something that I got into. Yeah. And I decided it was a good idea just because every old contractor that I've seen, that I've worked with, once they get, into their 50s and 60s, most of them are, they've got bad knees, or they've got a bad back, or,
physical toll.
Absolutely. It's construction's a very physically demanding job.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of people in construction not wearing kind of like the knee pads, like that kind of gear and stuff like that too?
I mean, there's times, right, when you're doing something, you're like, "Oh, I'm only going to be doing this for a minute, so I won't bother doing it." I've done it myself. Yeah. I still do it.
Yeah.
But it's not doing you any favors.
Yeah, exactly. There's a long-term consequences with these things.
Absolutely.
Oh, isn't the long-term harder? Like, it's like, it's easier in a way, because oftentimes doing the thing now before you have issues in the long term, like the total amount of problems, the total amount of issues is way less.
Absolutely.
However, it's a lot harder to think about something that's going to affect you 10, 15, 20 years from now.
Yeah, well, I mean, you get caught up in the moment sometimes when you're doing things, right? And you're like, "Oh, this is only going to take a moment. It has to be done right now." I'm kind of like, if you were, oh gosh, I don't know. Like sometimes if you were traveling off a floor or something and you had to get down on your hands and knees, sometimes it's a little silly to run to your vehicle or a tool trailer or whatever and grab a pair of knee pads to do that. But really, I find in the long run, it's all of those. Anytime that you can do that, it's always better.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. So what do you like about being a home inspector?
I like the idea that I'm not stuck in one place for any amount of time.
Yeah.
You're constantly moving. I'm always meeting new people. I always enjoy meeting new people. I always talk to them, find out what their background is, where they've come from. And I was always that person kind of on job sites when I was there. Like if we had, whenever you're on a job site and there's electricians there that day, I would always ask them, like, are we doing this right? What can I do to make this better for you? Or why are you doing that way? Just so that I could always learn, like, this is the way this should be, or not
exactly.
be, right?
As opposed to just like, okay, let's just keep doing things the way we've always been doing it. Like there's all these opportunities to learn from other people.
Yeah, because PEI is a pretty small place. So most times if you see an electrician, you're probably going to see that electrician again. You're probably the same, plumbers, whatever, always the same aspect. So it's, I was just always that person that would always ask them questions just to see why they're doing this a particular way. And I just find it interesting. Absolutely.
Into this line of work as well. Yeah. Cool. Do you get many sellers inspecting their homes before the sale to prepare?
There's certainly been a few. There wouldn't have been very many pre-COVID.
Yeah.
But certainly since COVID has come in, there has been a few for sure.
Do you have any that have regretted the decision?
I'm sure there's a few, right? Because I tend to be pretty picky with a lot of things.
Yeah.
So I know there's probably a few that are like, oh my God, like, why are you bringing this up? Yeah. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to bring everything up so that when they do get a potential buyer in, you can either show them the inspection report that these things have been fixed or these things were addressed. We're aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then that way, when they're making an offer, they at least have a clear idea of what they're offering on.
Right. And some people, right, they might want to bring in their own inspector. That's entirely their own.
Yeah.
Their own thing.
Well, naturally.
Yeah.
What do you think of spray foam insulation in general? And and what do you think of it on a block foundation that is a little bit leaky? Like that's two different questions, but when you go into a basin and you see spray foam insulation, what comes to your mind first also? Yeah,
I'm a big fan of spray foam insulation just because it is a continuous blanket of insulation. It has a vapor barrier in it as well. You're not getting those air leaks and things like that. So I'm a big supporter of spray foam insulation.
Oh, great.
There is some downsides to spray foam insulation.
Yeah.
For example, if you had it done in your basement and you had to repair a water line or something, like this past weekend where we had this super cold snap, I'm sure there was a lot of water lines that maybe had to be repaired. So if you had spray foam insulation and you had to repair a water line that was up inside your rim joists or in that area, you have to remove the spray foam insulation to get at that water line.
It's hard to do, right?
Well, it's hard to do, but once it's removed, there's no longer insulation there anymore. It's not like you can take the spray foam out and put it back in.
Yeah, it's meant to be.
It doesn't really work that way, right?
Right.
So I mean, it's like everything. There's pros and cons to it, but I'm certainly more of a fan than spray foam than.
And what do you think about, say, if you have a block foundation? I mean, what do you think of block foundations in general?
Yeah, I mean, block foundations, especially on PEI, I find our soil type maybe isn't quite the best mix with block foundations.
But they're still pretty common, especially in older builds.
Yeah, like typically in the 70s. Late 60s, early 70s, we had a lot of block foundations. I've seen some that were beautiful foundations that were blocks,
right? And
I've seen some that were not so great.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's all a matter of like gutters and grading is another huge thing with block foundations. Just general maintenance, like it's addressing any issues when they come up. Sometimes those blocks are going to move around a little bit. A lot of times you could maybe get somebody in, they might repoint them or maybe do a little waterproofing on the exterior, just to help preserve them.
Right. Yeah. And then if you do have if you have a basement that is leaking a little bit, probably you'd want to get that dealt with before you do the spray.
Absolutely. Before you do anything to your basement, that I think making sure that you're getting as little water as possible in that basement to none is an ideal situation.
Yeah.
Is always a great place to start.
Yeah, for sure.
Because the last thing you want to get into is spending thousands of dollars finishing a basement and then have, a huge water leak
Oh, exactly. And then you're
a few months
undoing all
later,
this work that you've done, and then
nobody's happy with that.
nobody's happy with that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we covered most of the questions here. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is like with home inspections is I would say to anybody that's looking to hire a home inspector is just look for references, ask about insurance. Experience is a huge aspect. Like, do your homework on it. Ask the inspector difficult questions. Like, don't be afraid to ask them, because that's your opportunity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what's the best way for people to get a hold of you?
So my cell number, my cell's always on me. It's almost always on. I very rarely ever turn it off. Facebook, email.
Great. And Assurance Inspections. And I'll put your contact info in the show notes. If you're listening to the audio only podcast, it'll be there in the show notes, or on YouTube, it'll be in the description.
Perfect.
And the info. So it'll be right up at the top if anybody needs to get a hold of you. Yeah. So, I mean, I think we covered. I just want to flip through the questions here because this just all happened. It just felt really fast to me.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to cover?
I mean, the only other thing I find with me is, just because I've been doing construction for so long, is I've got a great network of like plumbers and electricians and HVAC people. So, I mean, there's often times when I'm doing an inspection where I come across something that maybe I haven't seen before, or something that maybe doesn't look quite right. So then I have a great network of those people that I'll pick up my phone, give them a call, send them a text, whatever. And they normally get right back to me and say like, yes, that's good. No, I would, get somebody in to look at that, or, I find that's a valuable asset.
So you've been doing it this long. How often do you see surprises, or things you just never thought you'd see?
Not very often. I wouldn't say so much anymore. Yeah. When I first started, though, there was a lot of things that were really eye openers. But not so much anymore. I would say every couple of months, there's probably something that pops up that I'm like, oh, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
That's always a little interesting.
Oh, that's good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Bernard.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thank you for listening to Chattel Fixtures PEI Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, David Cyrus MacDonald. If you want to reach out to me for any reason, please visit chattelfixtures.com to find my contact information, show notes, etc. We're currently looking for diverse and interesting guests. If you would like to have a conversation with me, or if there is anyone you would like to hear me speak with, or have an idea for the show, let me know. Get in touch through the website or tweet at me at Chattel Fixtures. We're currently seeking out relevant sponsors with solid reputations, serving customers, particularly in some way related to the PEI real estate market. If that sounds like you, get in touch with me if you want to support great, positive conversations about real estate happening right here in PEI. Visit chattelfixtures.com to learn more. Be sure to subscribe to Chattel Fixtures PEI Real Estate Podcast, and see you in the next episode.